When Sarah stared at the gas pump showing $53.75 with only $19.47 in her wallet and her daughter's school 12 miles away, she never expected the group of leather-clad Hells Angels pulling into the station to become her salvation. What these tough bikers did next didn't just fill her tank, it completely restored her faith in humanity and showed her daughter that heroes come in the most unexpected forms. But what made these hardened men stop everything to help a complete stranger? And could their act of kindness spark something even bigger than anyone imagined? The desert sun hung low on the horizon, casting the Chevron station in a golden haze that made the cracked asphalt shimmer like water, while the distant mountains stood silent against a sky painted in shades of amber and rose that reminded Sarah Martinez of the watercolor paintings her mother used to create during happier times, when art supplies weren't luxuries that had to be weighed against groceries and rent payments. The morning air carried the scent of sage and dust, punctuated by the sharp smell of gasoline and motor oil that clung to this roadside oasis on Route 66, where travelers had been stopping for decades to fuel their journeys into the American heartland, their destinations as varied as their stories, but united by the common need for the liquid sustenance that kept their vehicles moving across the vast expanse of possibility that stretched between one horizon and another. Sarah pulled her battered Honda Civic up to pump number 3, the car's engine coughing and sputtering like an old man with too many cigarettes behind him. Each wheeze and rattle a reminder of the mechanical problems she couldn't afford to fix, and the regular maintenance she had been forced to skip during the months when choosing between car repairs and Emma's school supplies had become a recurring nightmare that visited her thoughts during the quiet hours when her daughter slept peacefully, unaware of the financial calculations that consumed her mother's every waking moment. The Civic had been reliable once, back when David was still around and 2 incomes meant that oil changes and tire rotations were routine rather than impossible, but now the car reflected her own exhaustion. Both of them running on determination and prayer, while hoping they could make it through another day without breaking down completely. She could feel the familiar knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach as she turned off the ignition and heard the silence that meant another tank running on fumes and prayers. The kind of silence that preceded either solution or disaster, with no middle ground between them, and she sat for a moment in the driver's seat, gathering the courage to face whatever the gas pump would demand of her limited resources. The early morning stillness was broken only by the distant hum of traffic, and she could see the endless ribbon of Route 66 stretching toward horizons that promised either salvation or disappointment, while travelers carried their own burdens and hopes toward destinations that might or might not provide the answers they were seeking. "Mommy, are we there yet?" Emma's voice drifted from the back seat, sweet and innocent at 5 years old, her dark curls escaping from the ponytail Sarah had hastily put together during their rushed morning routine that had begun with discovering they were out of cereal and milk, forcing Sarah to give Emma a granola bar and orange juice for breakfast, while promising herself that tomorrow would be better somehow, even though tomorrow's problems were already lined up like dominoes waiting to fall. Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror at her daughter, who was clutching Mr. Buttons, the threadbare stuffed rabbit that had been Emma's constant companion since her father disappeared 2 years ago, leaving behind only empty promises and unpaid bills that still haunted Sarah's credit report, like ghosts of a life that had once seemed secure and predictable. "Almost, baby," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was talking about getting to school or getting through another day that felt like walking across broken glass while pretending everything was fine, maintaining the facade of competent motherhood that required more energy than she sometimes possessed, but which she summoned from reserves she didn't know she had, because Emma deserved to feel safe and loved, even when the world seemed determined to prove that single mothers were destined to struggle alone against forces larger than their ability to fight them. The gas pump's digital display stared back at her like an accusation, its red numbers glowing with the cold precision of mathematics that didn't care about her circumstances or intentions, showing $3.89 per gallon multiplied by however many gallons her empty tank would require, and she calculated quickly that filling up completely would cost at least $45, money that existed only in the theoretical realm of what she wished she could afford, rather than the harsh reality of what her wallet actually contained. Her tank would need at least 12 gallons to get Emma to school, herself to work at Mel's Diner, where she spent 8 hours serving coffee and pie to truckers and tourists, while smiling and pretending that her feet didn't ache, and her heart wasn't breaking from the constant stress of choosing between her daughter's needs and the basic requirements of survival, and then hopefully back home again, without running out of gas on some lonely stretch of desert highway where cell phone service was spotty and help might be hours away. Sarah opened her worn leather wallet, the one her mother had given her for high school graduation, with dreams of college and career success that now seemed like stories from someone else's life. Fairy tales told to children who still believed that hard work and good intentions were enough to guarantee happy endings. And she counted the crumpled bills for the third time since leaving their tiny apartment. $19.47, plus some loose change that might add up to another $1 if she was generous in her calculations and counted the pennies twice. But numbers had always been unforgiving, and today they seemed particularly cruel, displaying the gap between her needs and reality in brutal clarity that mocked even the most basic requirements for independence and dignity. The wallet itself told the story of her decline from optimism to survival mode, its leather cracked and worn from being opened and closed countless times in grocery stores and gas stations, where she counted and recounted money that never seemed to stretch far enough to cover everything that Emma needed, let alone the small luxuries that might have made their shared life feel less like an endurance test and more like the adventure she had once imagined motherhood would become. The morning heat was beginning to build, making the asphalt soft beneath Sarah's worn sneakers as she stood frozen at the gas pump, watching the Hells Angels dismount their motorcycles with the practiced efficiency of men who had performed this ritual thousands of times across countless miles of American highway. The sound of their boots on concrete created a rhythm that reminded Sarah of her father's work boots when he came home from construction jobs, back when she was Emma's age and believed that adults always knew what to do, before life taught her that grown-ups were just children with bills and responsibilities that never stopped growing. Marcus approached slowly, his movements deliberate and unthreatening, as if he understood that a woman alone with a child at a gas station had every reason to be cautious around strangers, especially strangers whose reputation preceded them, like shadows cast by their motorcycle brotherhood. "Morning, miss," he said, his voice carrying the gravel of cigarettes and desert wind, but softened by something that reminded Sarah of her grandfather, who had taught her to judge people by their actions rather than their appearance. "I couldn't help but notice you've been standing there a while, and I've been in enough tight spots to recognize when someone's trying to figure out how to afford what they need." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and shame, the twin emotions that had become her constant companions since David left, taking with him not just his presence but her confidence in her ability to provide for Emma without depending on anyone else's charity or pity. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her voice cracked on the words, and Marcus's expression grew gentler, as if he had heard that particular lie from his own mouth during his own dark nights of the soul. Emma had wandered closer, drawn by the curiosity that made 5-year-olds believe that every stranger might be a friend waiting to be discovered, and she was staring up at Marcus with the wide-eyed wonder that children reserved for giants and fairy tale characters. "What's your name, little darlin'?" Marcus asked, crouching down to Emma's eye level with the careful movements of someone who understood that children were easily startled. Like the wild horses he had gentled during his younger years in Nevada, before the Brotherhood became his family and the road became his home. Emma looked back at Sarah for permission, then whispered, "Emma Marie Martinez," adding her middle name with the pride that children took in their full identities, as if speaking all 3 names somehow made her more real and important in the world of adults who rarely listened to what kids had to say. "Well, Emma Marie Martinez, that's a beautiful name for a beautiful young lady," Marcus said, and Sarah saw her daughter's face light up with the kind of pure joy that made all the struggles worthwhile. The moments when Emma's happiness reminded Sarah why she fought so hard to keep them afloat in a world that seemed designed to drown single mothers who dared to hope for better lives. "My name's Marcus, and these are my brothers from the 81, he continued, gesturing toward the other riders who were watching this interaction with the protective awareness of men who had learned to read situations quickly and respond accordingly. "We're just 5 of the crew passing through, but we look out for families who need help." The other angels began to gather around, their presence somehow less intimidating now that Marcus had established the tone of gentle concern rather than threat, and Sarah found herself studying their faces, seeing past the tattoos and leather to recognize expressions she knew from her own mirror during the hardest days. The look of people who had survived things that could have destroyed them and chosen to become helpers rather than victims. Jake, the youngest of the group, had kind eyes that reminded Sarah of her brother before the army changed him, and his smile was genuine when he nodded respectfully in her direction. Tommy, whose gray beard spoke of decades on the road, kept glancing toward Emma with the fond expression of a grandfather watching his own grandchildren play. "Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but if you're having trouble with gas money, my brothers and I would consider it an honor to help out," Marcus said, his words chosen carefully to offer assistance without stripping away Sarah's dignity, a delicate balance that spoke of his own experience with pride and poverty. "We've all been where you are, making every penny count, wondering how we're going to survive until the next paycheck arrives without asking for help that feels too much like charity." Sarah felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, not just from gratitude, but from the recognition that this stranger understood her struggle in ways that her own family, comfortable in their middle-class assumptions, never had. Emma had wandered closer to the motorcycles, her small hands pressed against her sides as she fought the urge to touch the gleaming chrome and leather, her natural curiosity battling with Sarah's repeated warnings about not touching things that didn't belong to her. "It's okay, sweetheart," Jake said softly. "You can look all you want. These bikes love attention from pretty little girls who appreciate their beauty." The way he spoke to Emma with respect and genuine interest rather than the condescending tone that many adults used with children made Sarah's heart clench with appreciation for this unexpected kindness. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of creosote and distant rain, and Sarah realized that she was standing at a crossroads that had nothing to do with the intersection of highways visible from the gas station. This was the moment when she could choose between the pride that had kept her struggling alone and the courage to accept help from the most unlikely source, between the fear that had shaped her decisions since David's departure and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the world contained more goodness than she had dared to believe. Sarah's moment of decision crystallized into action as Marcus turned toward his brothers with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of leading men through situations where hesitation could mean the difference between safety and disaster. "Boys, we've got a family in need here," he called out, his voice carrying across the gas station parking lot with the authority of someone whose word had become law among his chosen brotherhood. And Sarah watched in amazement as 5 hardened bikers responded with the immediate coordination of a military unit receiving orders from their commanding officer. Jake was already walking toward the convenience store, his footsteps echoing across the parking lot, while Tommy began inspecting Sarah's Honda Civic with the keen assessment of a mechanic who had kept countless vehicles running on hope and determination. "Ma'am, when's the last time you had your oil changed?" Tommy asked, his experienced hands already checking fluid levels with movements that revealed years of mechanical expertise gained on countless roads, maintaining machines that carried their riders safely across thousands of miles of unforgiving highway. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she realized she couldn't remember the last time she had been able to afford basic maintenance. Her survival budget stretched so thin that oil changes had become luxuries she couldn't justify when Emma needed new shoes or winter clothes. "It's been a while," she admitted quietly, and Tommy's expression grew understanding rather than judgmental, as if he had expected this answer and was already formulating solutions. Emma had gravitated toward a massive Harley painted in deep blue with silver flames dancing along its sides, her small fingers tracing patterns in the air just inches from the gleaming chrome, and the bike's owner, a mountain of a man named Bear, whose gentle smile contradicted his intimidating appearance, was explaining the meaning behind each custom detail with the patience of someone who truly loved sharing his passion. "See these flames here, little angel?" Bear said, his voice surprisingly soft for someone whose massive frame suggested he could bench press a small car. "Each one represents a friend I've lost along the way, riding the highways of heaven while we keep their memory alive down here. Marcus had taken control of the gas pump, inserting his credit card with movements that suggested this kind of generosity was routine rather than exceptional, and Sarah watched the digital numbers climb steadily as her tank filled with fuel that represented more than transportation. It was freedom, dignity, the ability to get her daughter to school and herself to work without the constant anxiety that had become her unwelcome companion. The pump clicked steadily, marking gallons that would carry them through the next week, while Sarah struggled to process the reality that strangers were solving problems she had been battling alone for months. Meanwhile, Jake emerged from the convenience store carrying what appeared to be half the inventory, paper bags bulging with groceries that Sarah recognized as the staples she had been rationing to make them last until her next paycheck. Milk, bread, peanut butter, fresh fruit that Emma loved but Sarah could rarely afford, and canned goods that would provide security against the lean days that always seemed to arrive without warning. "Got some essentials for the little princess and her mom," Jake announced, his tone suggesting that feeding struggling families was as natural as breathing, and Sarah felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack under the weight of unexpected kindness. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of motorcycles idling and the wind rattling the gas station's metal signs. And Marcus paused in his work to look at her, with eyes that held depths of experience she was only beginning to understand. "Because every one of us in the 81 has been exactly where you are right now," he said simply, his words carrying the weight of truth earned through personal struggle. "Broke, scared, wondering how we were going to make it through another day without falling apart completely. And somebody in our crew helped us when we needed it most." The other angels began sharing pieces of their own stories, fragments of lives that had been broken and rebuilt through brotherhood and mutual support. And Sarah realized she was witnessing something far more significant than random charity. This was a philosophy of living, a code that bound these men together and extended their family to include anyone who needed what they had to offer. Diesel, whose arms were covered in tattoos that told the story of military service and hard-won wisdom, explained how the Brotherhood had pulled him back from the edge when PTSD threatened to destroy everything he had fought to protect. "These men saved my life," he said quietly, "not with words or therapy, but by showing up when I needed them most, and never asking for anything in return except that I pass it forward when I could." Tommy had finished his inspection of Sarah's car and was already under the hood, making adjustments with tools that emerged from his motorcycle storage like instruments in the hands of a master craftsman who had learned to improvise solutions from whatever materials were available. "Your alternator's working overtime, and your belts need attention," he called out, his voice slightly muffled by the engine compartment. "Nothing that can't be fixed, but you'll want to get it looked at soon before it leaves you stranded somewhere less friendly than here." His casual competence and genuine concern reminded Sarah of her father, who had taught her to check her own oil and change her own tires before life became too complicated for such simple self-reliance. Emma was now sitting on Bear's motorcycle, her small hands gripping the handlebars, while he explained the basic controls with the seriousness of someone inducting a new member into an ancient order, and Sarah marveled at her daughter's fearless curiosity in the presence of men whose society had taught them to avoid. "Someday, when you're all grown up, maybe you'll have your own bike," Bear was saying, "and you'll remember that the road belongs to everyone who's brave enough to claim it, no matter what they look like or where they come from." The gas pump clicked off at $53.75, representing more money than Sarah usually spent on gas in an entire month. And Marcus replaced the nozzle with the satisfaction of someone who had just solved a problem that mattered. "Tank's full, oil's checked, and I wrote down Tommy's number in case you need mechanical help," he said, handing Sarah a business card that felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in circumstances beyond their control. The card was simple, containing only a name and phone number, but it represented something Sarah had thought was extinct, the promise that help would be available when needed. No questions asked and no payment expected, except the understanding that kindness should flow forward rather than backward. The morning light grew stronger in the clear sky, transforming the gas station into an oasis of human warmth that defied every stereotype and assumption Sarah had carried about the intersection of different worlds. And she stood surrounded by groceries and goodwill while her daughter laughed with pure joy at something Bear had whispered about the secret language that motorcycles use to communicate with their riders. The morning air shimmered with heat and possibility, carrying the mingled scents of sagebrush and motor oil that would forever remind Sarah of the day her faith in humanity was restored by the most unlikely angels she could have imagined. Jake finished loading the last bag of groceries into Sarah's Honda Civic, his movements careful and respectful, as he arranged items to ensure nothing would be damaged during the drive to Emma's school. And Sarah realized that these men understood poverty not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience that had taught them the value of treating other people's possessions with the care they wished their own had received during the darkest times. "There's enough here for about 2 weeks," Jake said quietly, "and I made sure to get the kind of cereal Emma mentioned she liked. Plus, some of those juice boxes that make lunch feel special, even when everything else feels hard." Emma had reluctantly climbed down from Bear's motorcycle and was now clutching a small teddy bear that had materialized from one of the saddlebags like a gift from the universe itself, her face radiant with the kind of happiness that made adults remember why childhood was supposed to be magical, despite the harsh realities that waited beyond its protective boundaries. "This is Harley," Bear explained, introducing the stuffed animal with the same gravity he might have used for a new member of the Brotherhood, "and his job is to keep you company on long car rides and remind you that brave girls can go anywhere they want if they keep their hearts open to adventure." Marcus approached with a manila envelope that contained more than money. Inside were gift cards for groceries, a prepaid card for gas, and contact information for a network of support that extended far beyond this single encounter at a desert gas station. "This isn't charity," he said firmly, anticipating the protest that Sarah's pride was preparing to voice. "This is family taking care of family. And every member of our 81 crew who contributed to this envelope has been where you are right now, wondering if they were going to survive another week without losing hope entirely." Tommy emerged from beneath Sarah's hood with oil-stained hands and the satisfied expression of someone who had just extended a vehicle's life by several thousand miles. His mechanical expertise offered as freely as breathing, because competence shared was competence multiplied across a community that understood mutual aid as both survival strategy and moral obligation. "Changed your oil, tightened your belts, and checked your fluids," he announced, wiping his hands on a rag that had clearly performed this service countless times before. "She'll run better now, and you shouldn't have any problems getting where you need to go." The other angels began mounting their motorcycles, their movements synchronized through years of riding together across landscapes that tested both machines and the men who rode them, and Sarah realized she was witnessing the end of an encounter that had lasted less than an hour but would influence the rest of her life and Emma's understanding of how kindness moved through the world. Diesel started his bike with a roar that settled into the steady rhythm of an engine, perfectly tuned, and his salute toward Emma was formal enough to make her giggle, while informal enough to suggest that she had just been inducted into an extended family she hadn't known existed. "Mommy, are they really angels?" Emma asked as she climbed into her booster seat, her new teddy bear positioned carefully so it could see out the window while they drove, and Sarah found herself considering the question with theological seriousness that would have surprised her Sunday school teachers from childhood. "I think they might be," Sarah answered honestly, because the evidence seemed overwhelming. Strangers who appeared exactly when needed, offering exactly what was required, asking nothing in return, except the promise that kindness would continue flowing forward rather than stopping with its immediate recipients. Marcus was the last to mount his motorcycle, and he approached Sarah's window with the gentle authority of someone delivering a message that needed to be heard and remembered long after this moment had passed into memory. "The next time you see someone who needs help and you're in a position to offer it, remember this morning," he said, his words carrying the weight of wisdom earned through experience rather than books. "Because that's how we change the world, not through grand gestures or political speeches, but by showing up for each other when it matters most." As the Hells Angels rode toward the horizon, their motorcycles creating a powerful symphony that gradually faded into the vast silence of the morning, Sarah sat in her car with a full tank of gas and a heart fuller than it had been in years, watching Emma wave goodbye through the rear window while clutching her new teddy bear. The gas station returned to its ordinary function as a place where travelers paused briefly before continuing their journeys. But for Sarah and Emma, it would forever remain the location where they learned that salvation often arrived wearing leather jackets and riding Harley-Davidsons. carrying messages of hope disguised as acts of practical assistance. Sarah started her Honda Civic and pulled onto Route 66, heading toward Emma's school with plenty of gas for the journey and groceries that would last until her next paycheck. But more importantly, she carried with her a renewed understanding that the world contained far more goodness than she had dared to believe during the darkest months of struggling alone. In her rearview mirror, the gas station grew smaller until it disappeared entirely. But the memory of unexpected angels would remain forever, proof that kindness could appear from the most unlikely sources when hope seemed lost and faith needed restoration.